The news broke like a thunderclap across international channels. At a hastily arranged press conference in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to the microphone flanked by military aides and journalists packed shoulder to shoulder. There was no hesitation, no diplomatic dance, just a statement so direct, so explosive, it silenced every room it entered. The former President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, has knowingly authorized covert sabotage operations against the sovereignty of Burkina Faso. The crowd froze. Even the cameras paused for a half-second, as if struggling to process what had just been said. Traoré continued. This is no longer speculation. We have intercepted communications. We have names. And we are prepared to present this evidence to the African Union and the international community unless the United States takes immediate responsibility for the actions of its rogue actors. The White House, still recovering from a week of political scandals and intelligence leaks, went into lockdown mode. Aides scrambled. Phones rang non-stop. Press secretary statements were delayed, revised, delayed again. Inside Trump's Florida estate, the former president was watching live. The feed was slightly delayed, but the accusation hit just as he was finishing a round of golf. He stood still for a moment, lips tightening. No one said anything. This guy's playing with fire, Trump finally said, tossing the club. Behind the scenes, U.S. intelligence agencies were already on edge. For months, they had been monitoring African power shifts. But no one expected Traoré to call out a former president by name, and certainly not like this. Back in Africa, Traoré's staff revealed a bombshell, a series of intercepted digital messages between foreign contractors and an anonymous U.S. political figure. Codenamed Eagle, the figure allegedly approved cyber attacks on Burkina Faso's infrastructure, disinformation campaigns targeting local elections, and the quiet funding of rebel factions near the northern border. They didn't need to name Trump outright. But Traoré did. Eagle, he said, is Donald Trump. Within hours, Washington descended into chaos. Mainstream networks tried to downplay it. CNN questioned the legitimacy of the intercepts. Fox News called it a desperate stunt by a military strongman. But none of it could suppress the storm already rising online. Twitter, TikTok, and WhatsApp were ablaze with hashtags like #TrumpSabotage and #TrollLeaks. The phrase "Eagle is Trump" trended globally within 3 hours. The White House was forced to respond. At a late-night press briefing, the current U.S. administration's spokesperson walked a diplomatic tightrope. We cannot confirm the authenticity of these alleged communications. The United States has no official involvement in any destabilization efforts in West Africa. We urge all parties to act with restraint. But the damage was already done. The ambiguity sounded like guilt. And Trump? He didn't hold back. From his private social platform, he unleashed a fiery response. Ibrahim Traoré is a thug dictator who's blaming America for his own failures. I never approved anything. This is a leftist smear job backed by radicals who hate freedom. The post was shared over 1 million times. But then, Traoré released video footage. It was grainy, shot on a hidden camera, somewhere in a private Florida villa. A man who resembled Trump stood in a dim-lit room, speaking with a former contractor from a well-known intelligence firm. All I need is disruption, the man said. Something loud, something messy. Just enough for the media to call it unstable. We don't want another African hero. The room gasped when the footage aired. While U.S. officials refused to authenticate the clip, lip readers and analysts confirmed the voice, the posture, even the hand gestures matched Trump's speaking patterns. In Burkina Faso, hundreds took to the streets, not in fear, but in defiance. They held signs reading, "Our land is not your battleground. We don't kneel to billionaires. Expose the eagle." Meanwhile, in D.C., former intelligence officers privately admitted what officials wouldn't say publicly: this kind of operation, it fits the playbook. And for the first time, Traoré didn't look like a wild revolutionary. He looked like a man telling the truth. The next escalation wasn't verbal. It was digital. Overnight, Burkina Faso's national power grid suffered a coordinated cyber attack. Entire neighborhoods in Ouagadougou plunged into darkness. Traffic lights failed. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Mobile data slowed to a crawl. No one claimed responsibility, but everyone knew. Traoré's war room lit up with red alerts. His cyber defense chief confirmed it. Military-grade intrusion. Western signature. Clean, professional, designed not to cripple, but to warn. Traoré didn't flinch. He ordered the government to remain operational via satellite mesh networks. State-run media resumed broadcasts from backup transmitters. And at sunrise, the president appeared in an emergency national address, recorded by candlelight. "They think we'll kneel when the lights go out," he said, eyes burning in the flickering shadows. "But we are not afraid of the dark. We were born in it. We learned to lead in it." The message ricocheted across Africa. In Ghana, students gathered in candlelit halls to watch the speech. In Nigeria, blackout protests lit up the streets. In Kenya, a mural appeared overnight, a silhouette of Traoré standing tall over a lion with the caption "Sabotage breeds sovereignty." Trump, meanwhile, was losing control of the narrative. His own allies started distancing themselves. A senator from Texas stated, "We support democracy, but we don't meddle in sovereign nations." A major tech CEO suspended Trump's data sync program, citing potential abuse of private communication networks. Behind the scenes, former White House staffers leaked more. One anonymous source confirmed Trump's team had, during his final weeks in office, compiled a list of foreign agitators to neutralize using soft sabotage methods, disinformation, cyber interference, economic chokeholds. Traoré was on that list. In a confidential transcript leaked 2 days later, Trump's voice was again heard saying, "If they start seeing these guys as revolutionaries, we lose the grip. They need to look chaotic, not brave." The backlash was instant. For the first time in U.S. history, an emergency session was called not over foreign aggression, but to address a former president's potential role in cross-border sabotage. But Traoré wasn't interested in punishment. He wanted prevention. At the African Union, he gave a blistering speech. "We are not just defending Burkina Faso. We are defending every nation whose future is rewritten in rooms they'll never enter. No more secrets. No more backroom deals. We expose, or we perish." He raised a document, signed affidavits, email chains, voice recognition logs, all linking Eagle to targeted disruptions. And the room stood. Not in silence. In applause. The shockwaves reached deeper than anyone expected. By the end of the week, international newspapers no longer called Traoré a radical military leader. They called him the man who cracked open the empire. What had started as a regional standoff now threatened to unravel decades of quiet imperial design. In Washington, the pressure reached boiling point. Protesters gathered outside federal buildings holding signs like "Investigate Eagle" and "No President Above Borders." Analysts debated whether Trump's actions, if proven, could be classified as international sabotage or even economic terrorism. Inside a secure chamber of the U.S. Senate, a bipartisan committee convened behind closed doors. One senator asked bluntly, "Did we try to sabotage an African leader for refusing to play ball?" Silence. Then came a whisper from one of the aides. "He didn't just refuse. He exposed the whole game." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, Traoré announced the formation of a Pan-African cybersecurity alliance. Engineers, whistleblowers, and digital freedom fighters from across the continent joined what was dubbed Project Sentinel, a coordinated defense effort against foreign cyber warfare. For the first time, Africa wasn't just reacting. It was preparing. But not everyone was celebrating. A private intelligence firm in Europe, contracted during Trump's final term, was revealed to have provided backdoor surveillance tools to a dozen African opposition figures. These tools had been used to smear, blackmail, and discredit leaders resisting Western influence. Traoré released the receipts. Not just the names of companies, but the politicians they funded, the journalists they paid off, the NGOs they used as cover. And suddenly, the world couldn't unsee it. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about Haiti, Honduras, Congo, Bolivia, Syria. It was about every nation that had been destabilized under the name of freedom while puppet strings were pulled by shadow hands. And Donald Trump? He doubled down. On a live interview, when asked if he regretted funding anti-Traoré operations, he replied, "I did what had to be done. You want the world run by people like him? Be my guest. Let's see how long it lasts." But that clip didn't land the way he wanted. Instead, it was remixed, set to music, played at rallies, turned into a meme. And underneath it, people wrote, "We'll show you how long." Because Traoré's rise wasn't a moment anymore. It was a movement. The final confrontation wasn't fought on a battlefield or even on a screen. It happened in the courtroom of global opinion. The International Criminal Court in The Hague received an unprecedented joint petition signed by over 40 African civil society groups, 3 Nobel laureates, and tens of thousands of citizens worldwide, calling for an investigation into the political sabotage operations linked to Donald Trump and his former administration. The charges? Attempted destabilization of a sovereign state, violation of international cyber laws, orchestrated political interference. It was the first time in history that a former U.S. president faced formal scrutiny on the world stage for actions taken against a non-Western leader post-office. Trump's legal team called it a joke. "They can't touch him," one advisor scoffed. "America doesn't kneel to these courts." But behind the scenes, the panic was very real. The House Intelligence Committee reopened private archives. Media outlets scrambled to avoid admitting they ignored the early signs. And key insiders, once loyal to Trump's shadow operations, began leaking everything they had. One email, signed under an alias later traced back to a Trump PAC member, read, "Discredit Traoré before his speech at AU. Push militant narrative. Trigger dissent from inside." The exposure caused chaos. Even allies in Europe backed off. Germany's foreign ministry released a cold but firm statement. If these documents are authentic, they represent a serious breach of global democratic values. And still, Traoré remained poised. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was building momentum. He traveled, not to meet world leaders, but to stand with communities that had also felt the sting of sabotage: Haitian farmers who had lost land to corrupt development deals, Colombian villages wiped out by cartel violence linked to Western-backed regimes, Southeast Asian islanders flooded by resource extraction. Everywhere he went, he told them the same thing. You were not forgotten. You were deliberately erased. And now we write you back into history. And the people responded, not with riots, but with unity. They built libraries named after silenced activists, hacked billboards to play whistleblower confessions. Children in remote villages painted murals of birds flying from cages labeled death, control, and silence. And in the center of those murals, a figure with no crown, no robe, just a steady gaze. Traoré, the man who had pointed at a superpower and said, "You tried to break us. Now watch us rise." By the end of the year, Trump faced formal summons to testify before an international tribunal. Whether he showed up or not didn't matter. Because for once, the story of power wasn't being written by the powerful. It was raining in The Hague the day the tribunal convened. A gray sky stretched low over the International Court building as protesters gathered outside, some demanding Trump's arrest, others defending his right to act in America's interest. But inside the chamber, the storm was not in the clouds. It was in the evidence. The tribunal was unprecedented. A former U.S. president had been summoned, not by an enemy nation, but by the ripple of voices from former colonies, demanding to be heard. What began as a regional accusation had grown into a reckoning for decades of political manipulation cloaked in democracy and aid. Trump declined to appear. His legal team called it a globalist circus. But their absence only made the testimonies louder. First came the cybersecurity analysts, presenting forensic logs of the sabotage network, IPs, backdoors, and payment trails linked to shell companies with U.S. addresses. Then came the whistleblowers, former intelligence contractors, campaign aides, and diplomatic intermediaries, each confirming how Eagle was not just a code name, but a directive: disorient, discredit, destabilize. And then, finally, Traoré himself appeared, virtually, from a simple office in Ouagadougou. No military medals. No political theater. Just his voice. "Many believe this trial is about me," he began. "It is not. I am just one of many leaders who refuse to sell their country's future for a seat at a foreign table." He leaned forward. "This trial is about the cost of silence. About the price of pretending sabotage is strategy. About the long, quiet war waged through NGOs, trade deals, and digital wires." The judges sat still. So did the world. "I accuse Donald Trump not out of hatred, but because ignoring these actions normalizes them. Because if a powerful man can sabotage a democracy abroad and walk away laughing, then none of us are truly sovereign." The feed cut to black. Silence followed. And then the world began to move. Within weeks, a wave of legislative reforms swept across African nations: digital sovereignty laws, foreign contract transparency bills, and the first regional protocol for cyber self-defense. Other nations began to speak up. Leaders from the Pacific Islands, Latin America, and even Eastern Europe issued statements echoing the same demand: no more sabotage hidden behind diplomacy. And while Trump never sat in that courtroom, history did not forget. In textbooks and timelines, the incident was no longer called a scandal. It became known as the Great Exposure. As for Traoré, he remained in his country. Unmoved. Alive. Unbroken. And whenever someone asked how a small African nation stood its ground against a global empire, the people would point, not to a missile, or a spy, or a weapon, but to a sentence. The one that cracked the illusion. Ibrahim Traoré accuses Donald Trump of sabotage. And from that accusation, the world finally listened. Far from the courtrooms and candlelit protests, Donald Trump sat alone in his private Mar-a-Lago library, watching a muted news broadcast on a gold-framed screen. The headline scrolled slowly across the bottom. International Tribunal formally labels acts of sabotage against Burkina Faso as verified. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. Just stared. Behind the bravado, behind the public denials, he had seen it coming. The silence from former allies. The shifting tone in conservative media. Even a few donors pulling back, citing reputational risk. None of them would say it outright, but they were retreating. Not from him. From what he represented now. A symbol of power with no leash. And Traoré? The African kid he once dismissed as a temporary nuisance? He was now something more dangerous than a rival. He was a myth. A signal. A new kind of revolutionary that didn't need guns or coups, just proof, poise, and a camera. Trump paced his office, glancing at the shelves filled with ghost-written memoirs, golf trophies, and awards he no longer bragged about. On the desk sat a thick folder with international court correspondence marked urgent. He hadn't opened it. He didn't need to. He knew what it said. He flipped open his laptop and typed out a post. Then paused. For the first time, the words didn't come easily. What could he say now? Fake news? Witch hunt? It had worked before. But this wasn't a New York courtroom. This wasn't a DC headline. This was the world calling his bluff. So he deleted the draft and shut the lid. Outside, reporters waited for a statement. Protesters held signs reading, "You broke the world to keep control. Africa remembers. Expose the eagle." But none of that reached him. What did reach him, what haunted him in quiet moments, was a new fear. Not jail. Irrelevance. He would not be remembered as the man who changed America. He'd be remembered as the last president who tried to silence a continent and failed. And in that silence, something bigger was rising. Not just Traoré. Not just Burkina Faso. But a movement too loud to censor and too unified to fracture. From the ashes of the sabotage, a new world order was being whispered. And Trump? He was no longer a storm. Just the shadow of one. Weeks turned into months. The tribunal faded from Western headlines, replaced by celebrity scandals and election cycles. But in the global South, the echoes only grew louder. Traoré had not just exposed sabotage, he had ignited a blueprint. In Ethiopia, youth activists launched their own inquiry into foreign-backed media infiltration. In South America, indigenous leaders began broadcasting stories of land theft traced to international mining lobbies, stories once dismissed as conspiracy, now seen as evidence. Across the Caribbean, a new wave of education reform emerged, decolonized curriculums, digital autonomy, and student-run networks that didn't rely on Silicon Valley servers. It wasn't chaos. It was clarity. And through it all, one message kept resurfacing, not from Traoré himself, but from ordinary people. In graffiti on bridges. In pirate radio stations. In hand-painted slogans stitched to burlap in refugee camps. We don't need their permission to heal. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré walked through a crowded market with minimal security. No fanfare. Just nods from farmers, bakers, children. A grandmother handed him a bag of dried mango slices. "For your journey," she said. He smiled. "I'm not leaving." She nodded. "But the journey isn't just yours anymore, is it?" He paused, realizing the truth. This wasn't about whether he survived the storm. It was about whether the people remembered what it sounded like. Later that night, he met with a group of elders, not politicians. They gathered under a baobab tree, as they have for centuries, to discuss the future. No scripts. No cameras. One asked him quietly, "Do you think they'll ever apologize?" Traoré didn't answer right away. "They won't need to," he said at last. "The world's already changed. And they're no longer in control of the narrative." Far away, in a marble hall in Brussels, a statue of a colonial general was quietly removed in the early hours of the morning. No ceremony. No press release. But someone had carved 3 words into the base before it vanished. Africa fought back. And the message was clear. You can erase the monuments, but not the memory.